Hey y'all, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. And I think for us, there is a little extra pressure to make sure that we can do a good show today, because after all, when you think about Before the Hedges, you think about recruiting, and when you think about recruiting around Dog Nation, you think about our buddy Jeff Sentell. Well, Jeff has worked hard all year long. He's earned himself the right to take a bit of a vacation, so we're letting him actually out of Dog Nation World Headquarters for this week to go enjoy himself a bit, but we want to make sure that we put out some recruiting information and have a good time here on this program. So over the course of the next hour, you can judge and see for yourself just how well we do doing Before the Hedges presented by Kroger with that Jeff Sentell here today. Now, actually on the program, I shouldn't oversell this too much in terms of it being a Jeff-free show, because the truth is it's not completely Jeff-free. Later on, for those of you who've been really missing Mr. Sentell around Dog Nation over the last few days, I had a chance to catch up with Jeff, kind of a big picture, 10,000 feet perspective on where things stand with Georgia with its 2020 class before he left to go on vacation. So for those of you who are kind of jonesing for a fix, you can get that from Jeff coming up a little bit later on. We're also going to bring in our buddy Connor Riley, who's been following the internet very closely the last few days. Every twist and turn that we know about some of these guys that Georgia's been chasing down, Connor will help us keep up to date on that. We'll still do Six Pack like always. We'll still take a lot of your comments like always, including a $50 Kroger, how about them groceries gift card a little later on in the show too. But off the top of the program, what I think of as a special surprise. I do realize on this show you were used to hearing Jeff Sentell interview the top football recruits in the country, and Before the Hedges will always be primarily a football show. But last week, I had a chance, along with our buddy Michael Carvel, who you may know from kind of behind the scenes, behind the glass here at Dog Nation, I had a chance to catch up with a very interesting young man. I'm talking about the five-star basketball signee, Anthony Edwards. Now, Edwards, much like many of the football players, showed up on campus this week to begin not just his career at UGA as an athlete, but his career at UGA as a student as well. But before Edwards went to Athens to enroll and begin his life there in the Classic City, we had a chance to catch up with him. And over the course of this conversation, something that hasn't aired yet on any of the Dog Nation video platforms, you're going to hear Edwards talk about a lot of things, about why he chose to attend college, about why he wanted to attend the University of Georgia, about why he views the future for Georgia basketball as incredibly bright and thinks that Georgia has a chance to do big things with him wearing that uniform. And in particular, something about the Edwards interview that I really enjoyed. Edwards, as many of you may be aware, or as some of you could be aware, at one point in time as a child, was actually a really good football prospect as well. So we kind of joke about that, his connection to that game, and of course his very, very high expectations as a basketball prospect as well. So there are a few athletes on campus right now for the University of Georgia with a higher profile than the five-star basketball signee, the guy they call the Ant-Man, Anthony Edwards. I had a chance to catch up with him recently. Hope you enjoy the interview right now as a part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Before he goes to the University of Georgia, start his college career, Anthony, the Ant-Man Edwards, is good enough to spend a little time with us here on Dog Nation. Anthony, first of all, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
So one of the things that amazed me about your story is how fast all of this seems to happen. You go from at one point in time being a four-star recruit, now you're a five-star recruit, right. You reclassify. Are you ever amazed at kind of how fast all of this has come together?
Yes, sir, most definitely. I mean, time flies, so like my coach told me, it's going to go by real fast, so you got to make sure you make the best of it.
What have you learned as you've kind of been poked and prodded? Media guys like me want to talk to you. Scouts want to analyze you. What have you learned about yourself throughout all this process?
That I'm just a great kid. I mean, I'm always happy, fun to be around, and just respectful.
One of the things you and I were talking about before we started the interview is I hear from Georgia fans every day, and one of the things I hear is how much excitement there is about having you on the Georgia campus. You're about to show up there as a student. You'll be a player later on in the fall. Do you get a sense from Georgia fans yourself about the sense of anticipation about having you on the floor?
Yes, sir. I mean, it's just fun to know a lot of people is happy for me to come on campus. That means I feel like I'm going to be at home all the time. I'm not going to need to go back home, so I'm just glad to know that.
And, of course, one of the things that Georgia fans like to do is pass around those highlights, the big dunks and things like that. And I was looking at some highlights for you, and if you don't mind, I want to show you something for a second. What comes to your mind when I show you this series of highlights right here? What comes to your mind when you see
Hey, that's the dog, man. That's that football. Hey, I loved football when I was younger. I was a dog.
So I have to admit, until recently, I didn't know you were. I mean, when you watch these highlights, you're obviously the same Ant-Man we see on the floor.
Yeah, I'm good at football. I can play wide receiver, but
I mean, do you ever think what might have been when you see yourself doing that kind of
Yeah,
stuff?
sometimes I'll be thinking like, man, I could play out there with those people, but I just don't like it no more.
I can understand that. But being at a school like Georgia, where obviously the football program is so good, I'm sure you're planning on going to a lot of games, right?
Most definitely. I mean, I'm really cool with LeCount, Brian, so I'm looking forward to going to a whole lot of games.
Now, obviously, because the football program has been so big, the basketball program still looking for that same kind of success. Do you feel any, I guess, extra pressure knowing that a lot of people say Anthony Edwards is the player we've been waiting on for a long time? Does that put any extra pressure on your shoulders or anything?
I mean, no, sir. It's just I love this game. I mean, one day I want to get paid to play this game, so I feel like it's not pressure. I mean, I go to the gym, work this amount of hours to be who I am, so it's no pressure. It's what I do, so I just love it.
One of the things I've heard you say before is that one of the things that influenced you to want to play for Tom Crean was the fact that Tom Crean coached Dwayne Wade, Victor Oladipo at Indiana. But one of the things about you, if you don't mind me saying so, that makes you different than them, and I don't mean to brag on you, but you're probably more developed as a high school guy than
when they came in, they wasn't that developed. He had to help them. They had the game, but they wasn't there yet, so he had to help them. So me, this is how I look at it. Me coming in with my development already is gonna just make me way better. If he could develop him into that type of player, what can he do with me?
How do you think that's going to force him to coach you differently, knowing that your game is – these are guys that got drafted very high. Right. How's that going to make your, I guess, his relationship with you a little different? How do you think that's going to change that?
I mean, I don't think it's going to change it at all. I mean, treat me the same as you treat everyone else. I'm going to respect you, you respect me. I mean, I love Tom Crean. I mean, I just can't wait to play for him.
What is your relationship with him like, and what have you kind of learned about him as you've moved through the recruiting process?
He's really energetic. I mean, he's always having energy every time he comes around me. He loves basketball. He loves to talk about basketball. So that's the type of person I want to be around.
That sounds great. One of the things that we as fans do is we like making comparisons. This player reminds you of that player. When you look at your own game and what Dogs fans are going to see on the court this fall, who do you pattern your game after, or who do you think fans are going to be reminded of when they watch you play?
I don't really pattern my game off of anyone. I mean, my dad, my brothers, I'm going to pattern myself off of Anthony Edwards. That's what they're going to see.
I like that. You bringing your own style to the table. There was some news involving Georgia this week. Nicholas Claxton, the guy, a veteran that you could have played with. He's going to stay in the NBA draft. What's your reaction to finding out you're not going to get a chance to play with Nick?
I mean, at the moment it was bad, but I got to think about it in a good way. I mean, he's going off to pursue his dream, so that's great.
And obviously basketball is a little bit of a chemistry sport. We see this in the NBA too. So you're going to be playing a lot of other guys who are young too. How do you develop that chemistry early, knowing you guys are in some cases different parts of the country? You may know some, you may not know others. How do you develop that chemistry with the guys you will be playing with quickly?
I mean, just going up there early this summer, I mean, we're going to develop, us keeping in contact. We got a group chat going, so we're already cool. We're going to build chemistry when we get on campus, become close friends. We're all freshmen, so we know it's a lot for us to learn. So we're just going to help each other out and push each other throughout.
How much are you driven by some of the stuff that you see, whether it be the chase to be the number one player or the chase to maybe one day be the number one overall pick in the NBA draft? Obviously, you know what the internet says. You get compared to the R.J. Hamptons and the James Wisemans and the people like that. How much does that personally drive you to be viewed as the number one overall best?
I mean, I don't really get into all that. I just do what I love, play basketball, go out there, give it my all every time I'm on the court, and just thank God.
One of those guys, Hampton, just made the choice this week not to go to college. He's going to go play overseas. We're also living in an era in the future where we may not see guys that could go out of high school to the NBA. They may not go to college in a few years. So knowing all that's out there, why was college the right choice for you?
I mean, I just wanted to get an education. I mean, my family didn't have the money to pay for me to get an education, so if somebody's going to give me a free education, I'm going to take it.
And then, obviously, we don't know yet how long you'll be at Georgia. Some guys like you are only at school for a year. Some guys stay longer than that. But when you think about the time that you're going to be at UGA, ultimately, what do you want your UGA legacy to be?
Just always great energy, respectful kid. I mean, he's never, bringing bad energy, bad vibes around. Always respect the teachers, the staff, everybody. I mean, I want to leave a good impression on everybody.
How good do you think Georgia can be next season?
I think we can be really good. I'm looking forward to it.
Anthony, we're looking forward to seeing you play as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
That is the Ant-Man himself, Anthony Edwards. This is Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. I'm Brandon Adams. Connor Riley stepping in with us for a couple of minutes here as well. And by the way, speaking of Kroger, they invite you to fire up the flavor here as we head towards Father's Day weekend. You can plan the perfect meal for your dad, or if you are the dad, someone can plan the perfect meal for you with pork back ribs, brats, Italian sausages, everything else, ice cream, and of course, plenty of those beers like Terrapin beers, Sweetwater beer, all there for you. Check that out at Kroger, and you can get big savings with your card. And the reason why Connor's here is in a moment he's going to help us go through our top targets and update some football recruiting here for the class of 2020. But after hearing Edwards there, Connor, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because I've talked to a lot of football recruits, and when you make that comparison, that's a sport played with 11 guys. They wear helmets. A lot of times you can be pretty anonymous as a big-time football recruit. In basketball, because it's only 5 guys on the floor, you're less anonymous. Edwards seems very comfortable in the spotlight to me.
Yes, and it's something that he's going to be doing and dealing with next year. You know, he mentions the loss of Nicholas Claxton. I think that's only going to put more pressure on him. But based off that interview you just had with him, he's clearly ready to handle some of the attention and pressure that's going to be thrown at him every night in the
Not only is he ready to handle it, I think he seeks it. I think he actually likes the idea of extra eyes on Georgia basketball, eyes on him in particular. He is no stranger to the fact that he could one day be the #1 overall pick. I think that he is very comfortable in that world.
Right, and you know, he's not going to be the first one-and-done player to sort of, you know, not go to a blue blood. There have been guys like Ben Simmons, Markelle Fultz in recent years who have sort of followed that path. Hopefully, you know, he goes more of a successful route than those two, but he's certainly, I mean, you look at the highlights right now, you know, he didn't give a comparison for himself, but the name that's been thrown out there a lot with him is James Harden.
Yeah.
So that big guard can handle the ball. I imagine we're going to see the ball in his hands a lot next year, initiating the offense.
All right, I got to do a couple comments before we do our top targets here. First of all, I mentioned Father's Day at Kroger a moment ago. Chris Branham, maybe the quote of the day, says, "Is Dan Mullen going to do something special for Kirby Smart for Father's Day?" I think that's a very, very funny thing. And Adrian Carver says, "OMG, Connor out of the box and into the light."
Yeah.
Normally, for those of you who watch Dog Nation Daily, we do kind of a video comment section on our program every single day, and Connor does that from kind of over in the corner. So you've seen him on camera before, but never under the bright lights of the studio. So in a lot of ways, it's a studio debut for Mr. Riley, but we're really glad to have him here and glad to have you with us as well as a part of Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. And for those of you who may just be checking into the program, Jeff Sentell is still on vacation, but he is scheduled to be back with us next week as a part of our program, assuming he doesn't stay on vacation forever moving forward here. But with all that said, what you really want to know is more about this class of 2020 for Georgia and how it's coming together. So let's get ready to do that now as a part of Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, with our top targets for the class of 2020. And we're going to kind of update you on some of the news surrounding these guys as it plays out and has played out over the last 7 days. And as we roll on with our top targets, let me start with name #1 on that list, a relative newcomer to our top targets list. That's the 5-star cornerback Keely Ringo. And Connor, Ringo this week had a bit of an announcement for
A bit of an announcement, I think is a good way to put it. He teased that he's going to announce his top schools or final schools coming up here pretty shortly. He has not officially put those out yet, but there are sort of, you know, I don't know how many top schools he's going to have in there, but I know which 2 schools are currently at the top right now. It is the Georgia Bulldogs, which excites you very much.
Of course.
And there was some of that online chatter this week. He was back at Texas this week, and it looks like, in my estimation and in Jeff Sentell's and just about everyone in the recruiting industry's estimation, right now it is a 2-team race between the Texas Longhorns and Georgia Bulldogs for Ringo's services.
Name #2 on our list is also a guy that's been busy as of late. You mentioned Ringo being at Texas. Well, 5-star running back Kendall Milton was also at Ohio State this past weekend, but that has not stopped Georgia recruits and commits from still continuing to recruit Kendall Milton. Couldn't help but notice 5-star. Now, I guess courtesy of the Rivals rankings, 5-star offensive tackle Tate Ratledge. Obviously, the 24/7 composite will continue to work itself out, but Ratledge, upon being congratulated for being a 5-star, someone said to him, and frankly, Ratledge had a little bit of a recruiting pitch for Kendall Milton here.
Yeah, Ratledge going above and beyond his Call of Duty. Sir Ted Lasso on Twitter says 5-star Tate Ratledge blocking for 5-star Kendall Milton. Sounds pretty good. #GoDogs. Ratledge agrees with that, and you know, you're hoping retweets our endorsements here because Kendall Milton retweeted that.
Well, the one thing that I think, you know, we've talked a lot about Zachary Evans as of late, and it'll be interesting to see how Jeff weighs in on the Evans news as it's unfolded while he's been gone when he gets back into town. The fact that the Georgia recruits, the commits here, continue to talk so much about Milton means something to me. Doesn't guarantee me that Milton's coming to Georgia, but the fact that you see all this seeming connection between these guys says something about the substantial level of Milton's relationship with Georgia that may or may not exist with Zachary Evans.
Right, and Milton, he was on campus for G-Day. That was when a lot of these guys recruit, a lot of these big-time recruits, Mikhail Sherman, Eric Gilbert, a lot of those guys, they were on campus then, and they certainly formed a bond. And I know there's been a lot of online talk of, how committed is he to Ohio State? Well, to sort of alleviate his concerns here, the Georgia players and the Georgia recruits, they're still, trying to get Milton into this class. So as far as they know, he's still very open. And his dad went on Twitter also this week and made sure to let everyone know.
They did.
It is still a 4-team race. They still intend on taking all 4 official visits. He's going to LSU this weekend. He still has the Georgia and Alabama visits left. Those have not been officially scheduled to our knowledge yet, but you imagine those two are going to follow the LSU visit pretty quickly.
Dan Kiley on Facebook says Milton is our #1 target. We've got to have him. He says missing on Marshawn Lloyd Hurt. I think a lot of folks agree with Dan on that. And as far as targets you can't miss out on, name number 3 on our list is another example of that. The 5-star tight end Rick Gilbert. And if Ringo teased an announcement, Gilbert had more of an official announcement. What did Gilbert have to say
Gilbert
this week?
actually did make an announcement. He released his top 10 schools: Clemson, Southern Cal, Auburn, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Penn State, LSU, Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia. I think those last 2 teams now really seem to stick out for Gilbert. Those are the 2 schools he's been to the most. He was last on campus for G-Day. And this is sort of Jeff's list of the top remaining targets, but in my estimation, I think given the need and what's leaving at tight end next year, Gilbert is probably the top target on my own personal board.
If there was a bronze medalist on this list for Gilbert beyond Georgia and Tennessee, who's got the bronze right now?
Right now, I think it's a neck and neck race between Clemson and Alabama. Jeff has talked a lot about how Gilbert is looking out for how their tight ends are used. Alabama just had a tight end taken in the second round of last year's NFL draft, whereas Clemson didn't really use a lot of their tight ends last year, and they're probably not going to do so again this year. But Gilbert certainly, Clemson, given all that they've done and how well they throw the ball, that's going to catch the eye of a prospect as good as Gilbert.
James Crump says when it comes to this list, Jordan Birch should be #1. He's program changing and it concerns recruiting and building our defensive line. Well, he's not #1 on our list, at least as Jeff had it set before he went on vacation, but he's now the composite #1 in the 24/7 rankings, and he comes in at #4 on our list. No matter how you slice it, for Georgia or for South Carolina or maybe even for Clemson, Birch is still a big get for somebody.
He is. He, like you said, got bumped up to the #1 overall recruit. He's a consensus top 5 recruit. The interesting and the thing I kind of like about him, he's kind of a throwback. He does not do a lot of media. He does not talk a lot.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people wondering this week, did he make it to South Carolina this past weekend? There wasn't a whole lot known about it. We do know he was in Athens for the scavenger hunt back in May, so that at least shows that there is some interest there in Georgia. He is not originally, as we had Phil Kornblut from South Carolina on your show this week, he's not originally from the Columbia area. He's actually from closer to Clemson. But, you saw in the 2018 class, Georgia went into Columbia and pulled out Channing Tindall. There's a long way to go with this recruitment. And frankly, there's just a whole lot we don't know about him and where things stand. But Georgia has to feel good about where they stand with right now the #1 overall player in the 247.
Yeah, the other thing that the South Carolina reporter Phil Kornblut said on Dog Nation Daily this week that I thought was interesting is, in addition to living currently in Columbia, Birch is also a high school teammate of Will Muschamp's son. But what Phil said on our show, and Phil writes for a lot of newspapers out there in the state of South Carolina, does a radio show. He said, don't be so quick to assume that means a whole lot. And I took that as probably good news for Georgia. Now, it could just as easily end up being good news for Clemson, but certainly the geographic advantage for South Carolina because of the Columbia zip code, that may not be all that significant.
Right, and yes, he's considering Georgia, South Carolina, and Clemson. Those are the 3 schools closest to there. But to your point and to Phil's point, I don't know how much of directly being in the same city ties him down to potentially South Carolina.
VTW says, where's Zachary Evans on this list? My guess is by the time you see this re-rank again for us and before the Hedges presented by Kroger next week, I'm guessing you'll see Zachary Evans rising pretty high given his announcement of his finalists last week, but we would never do that to Jeff Sentell. We'll let him be the one that officially changes the top targets list. In fact, let's run through a few more of these right now. Number 6 on this list, of course, the 4-star offensive lineman, Cedric Von Prawn from New Orleans. He recently came out with his list of finalists. And number 7 on this list is the 4-star offensive lineman, Andrew Rame from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And this week, Connor Rame also had a bit of an announcement as well.
Yes, Rame took an unofficial visit to Georgia this weekend. He flew in from Tulsa. Number 2 overall guard in the country, number 1 prospect in the state of Oklahoma. We did a few weeks ago of sort of how Georgia has done getting the number 1 players out of certain states. Getting Andrew Raym might be, potentially Sam Pittman's biggest win, because Oklahoma has done just as good a job, not just as good, but a pretty close job to recruiting and developing offensive linemen as Sam Pittman has done at Georgia. So if Georgia can convince Raym to, sort of bypass the home state Sooners and come play at Georgia, that honestly might be the most impressive recruiting win in the Kirby Smart era.
So we'll pay close attention to that, see where it goes. Of course, Georgia got a commitment from a defensive lineman this weekend in Warren Brinson, a guy back in the fold. We'll see that impacts in the future. A guy like 4-star defensive tackle Timothy Smith, who had been on this list, also a guy from Florida. Georgia now has a couple defensive linemen from the state of Florida. We'll see where things go with Smith moving forward, but he was on this list most recently. And named number 9 on our list, Jacoby Cowan, a guy that Jeff Sentell has recently profiled at DogNation.com, and also a guy, Cowan, who's been pretty active on social media.
Right. Last week Jeff sat down, talked with him before going on his vacation, giving us a little bit more intel so we can, pay attention to. I think the big thing with Cowan, he sort of teased this week that an announcement is coming, that he's going to announce his first official visit.
Yeah.
I have to think Georgia might not be the first one, but it is going to be one of the official visits that he ends up taking. He is a pretty clear target out of North Carolina area. Someone who, sort of in that Jonathan Ledbetter mold, who you can move around on the defensive line. He can sort of play on the edge in the early rushing downs and then move inside for pass rushing purposes. He is someone who I know Georgia currently has 4 commitments in the class, and there's been a lot of talk of, who might drop out, who might stay in this class. He is someone who is still, despite the 4 defensive tackles in the class right now, someone who is very much a Georgia target in this 2020 recruiting cycle.
Somebody's pointing out on, did I miss a name here? I guess I did. Who was it?
Darnell Washington.
Yeah, Crow King 123 is laughing at me for missing Darnell Washington, number 5. Let me give Darnell his love, because gosh knows I'd love to see him be a part of this 2020 class for Georgia. Dropped to top 12 recently. Got a bunch of visits coming up all over the place. So by all means, let me not forget to mention the young man from Las Vegas on that with Darnell Washington.
Darnell, please don't hold that against me.
Please, yeah.
He still very, very, very much wants you to be a part of this 2020 Georgia recruiting class.
So I apologize with that. So let's make sure we give Washington his love there. Let's get the board reset. To mention Trenton Simpson here, a really good-looking linebacker who just came off a visit to an SEC rival.
He was in Auburn this weekend. His top 5 schools, Miami, Clemson, Auburn, Georgia, and North Carolina is sort of perceived as the favorite there. I know a lot of people might be wondering, where's Justin Flo on this list? I think the Georgia coaching staff might like Simpson a little bit more than they like Flo, even though I know Flo has the higher recruiting ranking. He's the number 3 overall prospect, I believe, whereas Simpson is still very good. He's a top 60 overall prospect, but he's someone who, fits that sort of move linebacker role, can play sideline to sideline. I'm not going to say Roquan Smith, but he sort of plays in a style that fits similar to him and can be a 3-down linebacker.
So let me get a couple questions here. Hugh on YouTube says, BA, who would you rather have, Theo Johnson or Darnell Washington? Here's the thing. I think that Theo may be a little bit more like a traditional tight end, but much like you say with a Rick Gilbert all the time, if you've got a chance to add a Darnell Washington, who is just a dynamic athlete, I think you got to do that, because as Jeff has told us many times, those guys almost look as much like big receivers as they do athletic tight ends. And so Theo may be more of a classic tight end, but Darnell is a really neat-looking athlete. It'd be hard to say no to him.
You know what's better than one really big, freaky wide receiver tight end?
Having 2 of them? Yeah, for sure.
Washington, and it could even sort of be, think like Charlie Warner. He was a guy who was a jumbo wide receiver. He was recruited as a wide receiver, and he moved into tight end. And, it wouldn't surprise us at all this year if Georgia came in and flexed out Warner a little bit, because he certainly got the athletic traits and build to do that. I wonder how much Washington and Gilbert, Gilbert, it's unknown how long his recruitment is going to go. Washington's almost certainly sort of seems to be on that, early December signing period time. How much he pays attention to the Georgia tight ends getting the ball during this season.
I think that's a good point. One more question from our YouTube comment section came from CJ Davis, who wanted to know, of these top targets, who'd be the number 1 on my list right now. I think for me, and it's hard to choose between a Gilbert, who I love, or Ringo, who I've grown to love. I think for me, though, it's still the running back, and it is Kendall Milton for me right now, although I'll admit I have really, really gotten excited about the relationship that seems to be growing between George and Zachary Evans. For me, though, it's still the running back, and for me, it's still Milton right now. There's always been something about Milton that I've liked, although admittedly, that was probably born out of the fact that months ago, it seemed like Milton was more interested in Georgia than Zachary Evans was. But one way or another, it is a running back, either Milton or Evans, and for now, it's still Milton at the top of my list. Connor, how would you answer that question for Georgia?
my personal belief in what Georgia needs, I would put Gilbert at the top of my board. But I think the fact that you could realistically say, you could say Milton, you could say Keely Ringo, you could say even Jordan Birch. Give it a few weeks, depending on how the Milton thing plays out. It wouldn't shock me at all if Zach Evans quickly becomes the top player on the board if he were to go to Ohio State or LSU. So the fact that you have so many different options and can be technically right on those, I think says a lot both about the overall, where Georgia sits with some of their top targets and sort of, the appeal that those guys have to the program. Whereas, they go to some other, theoretically, Zachary Evans may not be the top target on Alabama's board just because they signed Trey Sanders a year ago.
Quick final comment from Tim Taylor on this topic, who said, let's just get all three of those tight ends, Theo Johnson, Darnell Washington, Rick Gilbert. It's kind of funny. In addition to that, you had the nation's number 5 tight end last night, a guy that we really haven't talked a ton about, also named Georgia's finalist.
Yeah, Jalen Conyers, I believe, out of the Texas area. Again, named, I believe, Alabama, Oklahoma, and Georgia. The early scuttle is Oklahoma there, but he was recently at Georgia. So, Ohio State, excuse me. Georgia has a need a tight end. They're going to need, there's been some talk about how many running backs do they take in this class. They're going to almost certainly take 2 tight ends because Charlie Warner is gone regardless, and Eli Wolf is gone regardless. So there's going to be a lot of inexperience, a lot of early playing time possibilities for guys coming in next year, which is why I think you see guys like 5-star Rick Gilbert, 5-star Darnell Washington, number 3 tight end Theo Johnson, number 5 tight end Jalen Conyers, all sort of having Georgia at the top of their list.
All right, here's what's coming up today on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. Later on, there was kind of a cool moment for Georgia quarterback commit Carson Beck on his recent visit to Georgia, which is actually ongoing right now. We'll talk to you a bit about that. There was a big-time wide receiver who was recently in the Georgia campus. We'll address that for a little bit. So we got some big stuff coming. We still got trivia, 6-pack stuff, a lot more of your comments on the way as well. But here on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, as much as you like hearing Connor Raleigh talk recruiting, as much as you like spending a little time with me, Jeff Sentell, we know, is the guy you really want to hear from when it comes to this kind of thing right now. And luckily enough, I had a chance to catch up with Jeff a little bit last week before he went on vacation as a kind of let's reset the board moment for where things are going for the 2020 class, kind of a big picture perspective as we head towards the month of June and July. We're in June now. These will be crucial storyline months in terms of how the 2020 class comes together. I had a chance to kind of let Jeff tell us where he kind of thinks the board is right now, where Georgia has been, where it's going next. If you've missed Jeff, this is a great way to get caught up with him. Here's a part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. We're glad to have you with us as well. Hey guys, it's Brandon Adams with Jeff Sentell. It's part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Jeff's on vacation, but he's spending a little time with us as a pre-record here for our program. And actually during this summertime of year, while not just you, but a lot of our audience as well, kind of on vacation, it is a good time to kind of think about where things stand with the Georgia class at this moment. We've seen Georgia add to this point 10 commitments. They're all 4 stars or better, and there's still some work left to be done. Before we get to what's next, let's take a moment to look at what Georgia has right now. What do you think of this class as it's currently constituted?
Well, I think there's 10 names, 10 public commitments. Let me just say that.
All right.
And I think that the list, depending on attrition, depending on the NFL jumps, I think the list could probably go 23 eventually. So Georgia's almost at the halfway point there. I think this class with 2020, there were some clear goals that needed to be accomplished, and I think few of them have already been accomplished. You needed to get a quarterback successor, even an elite quarterback successor, where folks like you could, slick your hair back and really think Georgia's future of the quarterback room has some dripping with first-round potential. Carson Beck definitely does that. We've been documenting Carson Beck all over the place on Dog Nation over the last month. The other thing Georgia, I think, has accomplished already, and we started talking about this, Brandon, as early as we possibly could, maybe last November, December, as we started talking about Georgia is likely to lose 2 tackles, at least 1 tackle to the NFL draft. So then you look at the tackles exiting the Georgia program, and Georgia needed to get some franchise-type tackles. Broderick Jones, 5-star, nation's number 2 tackle. Tate Ratledge now, near 5-star, number 39 overall prospect in the country, number 5 offensive tackle in the country. Georgia is restocking that shelf, the top shelf, with some Tiffany's taste of offensive tackles.
So I was going to ask you about that. You think guys like Jones and Ratledge are, obviously they're effective replacements for guys like Wilson and Thomas, but do they get you as excited as those 2 guys would have gotten you back in the 2017 class?
I think Jones gets me as excited as anybody Georgia has signed, because I think he's that type of prospect. I think he can do the same things in the Georgia program, given that he's also enrolling early here with a head start, that Andrew Thomas, did in his first year, starting all 15 games in 2017. When you talk about immediate replacements, Brandon, I don't know if Jones and Ratledge are the immediate replacements. I think a guy like Cade Mays is an immediate replacement. And then I think a guy like, who else can Georgia move over there as your immediate replacement?
It's kind of funny that if we were having this big picture 10,000-foot conversation a few weeks ago, there'd be a lot of dire language with the state of the defensive line recruitment. But Jalen Carter's commitment a couple of weeks ago really changes that a lot. All of a sudden now, there's some dominoes in place. And it still remains to be seen in terms of how all this comes together. But Carter has the appearance of such a big get that all of a sudden I think it calms a lot of nerves from some fans about what the state of the Georgia defensive line recruitment is at the moment.
Yeah, I think those internet keyboard warriors need to hit the backspace button on what's wrong with Georgia defensive line recruiting and that smoke there now about Trey Scott, because I think Georgia and Trey Scott have now solidified this class with some elite talent at the defensive tackle position in Jalen Carter. He is the Trayvon Walker of this year's class already, nation's number 2 defensive tackle on 24/7 Sports. Not the composite, but the pure rating. And I would look for Carter's stock to keep going where he's going to sniff that 5-star territory as well.
Let me ask you about a different position group here for a moment, because it's one that we don't talk about a ton, and that's the wide receiver position. I know how much you like Justin Robinson. I know how much your sources like Justin Robinson as well. The young man from Eagles Landing Christian Academy, that's a pretty impressive athlete, a guy that's drawn some high school comparisons anyway to a guy like Calvin Johnson. And yet, in addition to the Robinson name, we don't hear a lot of chatter. You know, Rakeem Jarrett commits to LSU. Almost in the late stage of that, there was barely a peep when it comes to Georgia. Jermaine Burton, his Georgia interest seemed to kind of come and go. Maybe the Georgia interest in Burton you could describe very much the same way. At one point in time, we were talking about Julian Fleming taking a visit to Athens. I haven't heard anything about that, kind of in a while. Georgia doesn't seem to be in the mix with a lot of receivers right now. How are they addressing that for the class of 2020, and are they doing so in an appropriate fashion?
Well, they've got one of their 3 names. I do think Justin Robinson is going to rank as high on Georgia's board as anybody they could sign in 2020. I mean, he is a massive human being, lots of potential. Only played 1 varsity season last year, and Elka, Eagles Landing, won a state title. I think the names to think about there are Marcus Henning. Excuse me, not Marcus Henning. I just combined them. Marcus Rosemy, the nation's number 6 overall receiver. He's out of St. Thomas Aquinas in Florida.
Big time program.
It's sometimes maybe where trends emerge kind of creates a new path for another guy. Rosemy was for a long time linked to Ohio State, but now the Julian Fleming online chatter maybe has Marcus Rosemy after a great visit to Georgia. Maybe as a true contender there. The 24/7 Sports Crystal Ball has him as Georgia as the favorite for Marcus Rosemy. So what does Georgia do after that? I think there's 2 names. A.J. Henning, really fast dude out of the Chicago area.
Yeah, Illinois.
You hear about him a lot. He's already taken a great visit to Georgia. He told Jalen Kimber, Georgia commit, that he just says something different about Georgia compared to everywhere he's been before. The other name I would think about would be Corey Wren, a speedster out of New Orleans. He was one of those guys that had the headlock with the reptile with Sunshine at the scavenger hunt.
He's a better man than me.
10.41 flashes in the 100 meters. Looks a lot like Mecole Hardman, man. That's just what you got to say. His film, the way he acts, his mannerism looks a lot like Mecole Hardman. Wide receiver is a spot where Georgia's still got some work to do in the class, along with two other very big positions.
Well, speaking of those positions, let's transition here for a moment and talk about what's kind of next. We're heading into kind of the middle of the summer where a lot of action is expected. A lot of these guys want to have stuff wrapped up before they begin their senior seasons in August. What do you think? I'm not asking you to specify specific commitments or anything like that, but just in terms of the timelines and kind of the next few dominoes to fall, what is next for this 2020 class?
Well, I would think a wise man could predict that Georgia might have 14 commitments by the end of the summer, and that means before season start, late August, early August. August 20th is when they start right now. A lot of guys tell me they want to have their decisions wrapped up before their senior year to avoid the distraction. So what is Georgia going to need maybe with those remaining 12 or 13 guys in this class? And for me, there's 3 key areas. Number one, you got to figure out that running back,
Yeah, you
Kendall
really do.
Milton. I think if you got a yard for every time you've mentioned Kendall Milton's name so far this recruiting cycle, he'd probably already be over 1,000 in his Georgia career.
That's probably true.
You got to, what does Marshawn Lloyd do, the running back position? Well, Kendall Milton's name is still the constant. I don't think Zachary Evans is going to end up at Georgia. I think he stays at Texas. The other thing you got to think about, which will kind of decide how great Georgia's recruiting class is it a top 2 class? Is it a top 3 class? I think it's going to depend on the name Keely Ringo, number 1 cornerback in the nation. That's a name that Georgia fans do hope that domino falls for this class. And then the rest of it, the last core anchor kind of tent pole for Georgia recruiting in 2020, I feel is the tight end position. And that's names like Arik Gilbert, that's names like Theo Johnson, that's names like Darnell Washington.
I mean, it's 2 of those guys they're looking to take, correct?
Got to be 2 of those guys. 2 of the 3. I wonder if Georgia tries to get very creative and sits there and go, well, we're going to go 2 receivers and then take 3 tight ends because one of our receivers will flex out. Gilbert has the ability to do that. I wonder if that might be an eventual recruiting strategy Georgia might warm to should other needs not be met at other positions. But tight end, and then you also want to see Georgia continue to stock up that defensive line, get a little bit more than just Jalen Carter, maybe the name Jordan Birch there as well. And everybody wants to think about the 5-star count. So the right pieces come into this puzzle for the Georgia 2020 class. I still see a class which could include 5, 6, or 7 5-stars.
Let me finish with this. You mentioned names like Keely Ringo and Kendall Milton a moment ago. The epicenter of a lot of those guys and what we've seen from them online, MJ Sherman's kind of always at the middle of that. Is it safe to say that he's been Georgia's most important commit through the first few months of this 2020 cycle?
He's the highest rated commitment on the board. As important as Carson Beck is, I think he's number 5 for what he means to the future of Georgia football. But the way this young man speaks, the conviction in his words, the way he can inspire others as a true leader of the class, I think he's the E.F. Hutton, maybe not so much a Pied Piper. Maybe he's the Bill Gates or Apple CEO of this class. When MJ Sherman says something, a lot of recruits around the country pay attention to that. He's very well respected. He's went through some adversity in his life. And let's face it, when MJ Sherman committed to Georgia, people started feeling like this is going to be another Kirby Smart year where Georgia's going to get a lot of the guys, almost all the guys they want.
So I'll ask you then to close this out. If Sherman's been that guy thus far, of the uncommitted, at least to use your phrasing publicly, the uncommitted guys, who's the most important guy that's still out there right now?
I think 3 names, Brandon, and I think it's kind of one of our 6-pack questions on our Hedges programs we always do. I think any of these 3 names you can make a case for. Keely Ringo, I think he's an immediate play right away guy, not just the hype, the reality in Georgia's secondary. I think it's Kendall Milton. The running back position must be addressed with at least 1 elite target in this class. And I think it's Arik Gilbert. Because I think all the in-state worries and the tight end position for Tennessee or Oklahoma and LSU to swoop in and take an Arik Gilbert, I think that would be damaging to the overall hubris of the 2020 class.
The next time we talk, it'll be live again back in our Dog Nation World Headquarters studios, and we'll look forward to doing that with you, Jeff, very soon.
All right, guys.
Great to get a chance to talk to Jeff Sentell there as a part of his pre-vacation discussion. Now we're back live. Connor Riley hanging out with us for a minute here as part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. And while that was going on, a couple comments I want to highlight from our various comment sections. First of all, Cool Breeze on YouTube in reference to a lot of these different position groups. He thinks the tight end position, I'm assuming because of the dynamic level of the player available for Georgia in 2020, may be more important than wide receiver. Maybe that's because of Blaylock and Pickens from last year's class, but there's no doubt there is an interest in these tight end names this year that does make it fair and compare pretty favorably to tight end.
It's an interesting year in the sense that Georgia has a clear need at tight end, and it's one of the rare times where you've got really 2 guys who project to the next level as 5-stars in Arik Gilbert and Darnell Washington, who project as those true 5-star elite difference makers who can come in and play right away, available and sort of listening to the offers and pitches that Georgia has, which I think makes, the idea that, you have to go and get these, to your point about wanting to get Kendall Milton so badly, there are an abundance of 5-star running backs, and Georgia also has a need there, and I think that's why you see tight end and running back in this class in particular are the two positions we spend the most time talking about.
All right, one more quick comment before we move on, because we've got to do trivia. We've got to do some updates on some of these other names that I mentioned before. Shannon Baker mentioned that exchange that went on with the Ohio State reporter and Chris Milton, the father of the 5-star running back Kendall Milton, where Milton seemed to downplay the idea that Kendall was so impressed with Ohio State that he was now kind of what basically amounts to a silent commitment to the Buckeyes. Chris Milton shot that down. Obviously, I took that as good news. But this notion that all 4 of the finalists are all equal in the Milton's mind right now, I think that makes deciphering what's really going on here incredibly difficult.
Yes, I actually, so I appreciate we are publicly all 4 schools are equal. But I also, I don't know how true that can be on like an internal level. And they don't need to tell us, internally, hey, how they're feeling.
It's their right to keep it a secret if they want to.
They're going to take this thing the distance. They're going to visit all 4 of these schools. There's a reason these 4 schools were finalists. They're going to honor sort of the commitment they made to them, and then they're sort of going to evaluate everything. They're not going to cut corners. They're not going to say, hey, I kind of know what I want to do. I'm, not going to go see Alabama. I'm not going to go see Georgia. And Chris Milton has made this very clear. The family is going to let Kendall do what is best for him, and they are going to have all the cards on the table.
All right, before we do our 6-pack and do some trivia, Connor's been good enough to write up questions for us this week. Let's also check in on, as I like to call it, the online chatter, some of those other recruiting stories that are out there right now. You heard Jeff a moment ago mention A.J. Henning, the 4-star receiver from the state of Illinois, alongside Marcus Rosemey. These guys get talked about a lot in terms of potential additions for the Georgia for the class of 2020, and Henning was recently on campus.
Henning took his official visit to Athens this past weekend. Based off the online chatter, if you will, it went very well. Both Henning tweeted about it, and his mom said that UGA is mom approved, which you like to see.
There you go. Listen, that matters. That matters.
Parents are always a key. The other 2 schools to watch for in Henning's recruitment are Michigan and Notre Dame. He's going to take official visits there later this month in June, and he will sort of make a decision shortly after that. But Georgia has to like where they currently stand with one of their top wide receiver targets.
Somebody else was on campus too, was a very big offensive lineman.
Yep, Chad Lindbergh, a tackle out of Texas. Again, sort of like Keely Ringo. You see here.
I love this picture, by the way.
Sam Pittman just really going all out. He's got the Savage spikes on.
Yeah.
He's posing there. This is why Sam Pittman is arguably the best assistant in the country.
I think it's a great picture. I love the idea of Pittman with the Savage spikes on, and as he always does, he's pointing these young men to the University of Georgia. But the best photo from any visit, maybe from one that's ongoing right now, Carson Beck on his Instagram feed showing off himself with Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. First of all, it makes me feel old to think that the young guy Beck wants to hang out with the now the older stately veteran Fromm. Our buddy Michael Carvel points out that a little bit of height difference with Beck and Fromm here. And, overall, I just like the idea of this, figuratively speaking, baton being passed from Fromm to Beck for the future.
Yep, you've got the present starting quarterback in Jake Fromm. Could be 1 year, could be 2 years, depending on what he wants to do with his NFL future. And you've got potentially Beck coming in right behind him. That's something, that's a picture. Maybe one day when they're both, national championship winning quarterbacks.
I like the idea of that.
First round draft picks, that's something they can look back on and share.
All right, speaking of quarterbacks, let's talk for a moment about a couple 2021 guys. An in-state guy, Brock Vandegrift, he put out his finalists this week.
Yep, released the top 6. He is actually from sort of pretty close to the Athens area. In Bogart, goes to Prince Avenue Christian Academy. Georgia was in that top 6, along with Oklahoma, Florida, which he recently visited, which I know you might not like a whole lot. Auburn, Tennessee, and Clemson.
I feel like there's nothing that convinces you of the coolness of UGA than spending a little time in Gainesville.
Yeah, he's kind of had to do some opposition research and sort of see what he says. All right, I've seen them. Georgia is certainly going to be looking at him as a prospect. I believe he's, a top 40 overall prospect in that 2021 class.
Incredible edit here by whoever put this together. It's very impressive.
It's edit season right now, as we like to say. This is one of the more top-notch ones we have seen.
And there was also a guy from that same kind of Beltway area that's been good to Georgia before, Caleb Williams, also a 2021 guy, probably more of a dual threat quarterback, but he had some news.
Yep, he, Vandegrift, Beck, and a couple of 2022 quarterbacks were all in Athens this week throwing for coaches. I think right now the top 2021 quarterback targets are Vandegrift and Williams. They're a little bit different. Vandegrift is more your traditional drop back quarterback, pro style, sort of in that Jake Fromm mold, whereas Williams is more that dual threat guy that Georgia sort of looked at and tried to get more and more involved with as the Kirby Smart era sort of develops.
You mentioned it being social media edit season. It's also, to a certain extent, offer season as well. And I've said before, I'd like to see Georgia involved in the county of Gwinnett, and Barrett Carter is a guy from that county, and he gets a little love from UGA.
2021 linebacker prospect. In the past week, he has picked up offers from Alabama and Georgia. I think that tells you all you need to know about where sort of his future is going and sort of the prospect that Mr. Carter can be.
Yeah, Stephen Wainwright says Carson Beck looks 6'4", and he looked every bit of 6'4" in that photo there, really looking the part of that big-time quarterback for Georgia in the future. You see that photo one more time, and I got to tell you, that's a pretty cool thing to be able to see as this lineage of quarterbacks now moves on. Hard to imagine what could be the post-Jake Fromm era here sooner rather than later. Nice to see Carson Beck ready to step in there in that regard. All right. Coming up later on, we got a lot of your comments as well. We go hurry up, take as many as we can. I also want to remind you that it's perfect timing for Father's Day. You can get 4 times the fuel points on gift card purchases at Kroger. Gift cards are a great gift for dads. I know I love those. And you can download the digital coupon on Wednesday, June 5th, that's today, and earn points through June the 18th on any gift card purchase, including Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops, and more. Those are the kinds of places that dads typically like, so you can check that out at your local Kroger. All right, every week, Jeff Sentell does his weekly six-pack. Trivia questions designed to stump me, and in most cases, you all as well. And sometimes we fight back and do a pretty good job. This week, though, Connor Riley's been good enough to write the questions. So, Connor, I give you the floor to unveil those for us here today.
I think you're going to like these. They're
okay, good.
More straightforward, not necessarily as much trickeration. All right, question number 1. The last time UGA basketball, we led with Anthony Edwards sitting down talking with you this week. The last time UGA basketball signed a 5-star basketball player was in 2011, Contavious Caldwell-Pope. How many 5-star football prospects did Georgia sign in 2011?
2011 class. Whew, that is a good question. I'm going to say not 0, but not a million either. I saw 1 as a choice. Is 2 a choice?
2 is a choice and 3 is a choice.
I'm saying it's 1 or 2, either B or C as the answer. I'm going to say it's B1. I'm going to say B1. We'll give other folks a chance to answer here. Elite Georgia Boy says it's A0. Crow King says he thinks it's 2. CJ Davis does as well. I think my answer is B1. I honestly have no memory of who it would be, but that seems about right. Either 1 or 2. I'll go with B1.
Could you imagine how upset you'd be in today's
oh
era
my
if
gosh.
Georgia only got 1?
If Georgia goes a month without a 5-star commit, I start to get a little shaky and a little nervous. Things have changed a good bit since then.
You know, Sentell's not out, but you're still getting stumped.
Listen, I do. That's what I do.
Trivia back up. The correct answer is 2.
C2. Okay,
C2.
So I'm really good at narrowing it down to 50-50, and then sometimes I guess wrong on the 50-50. So it was 2.
Now, some of you might be wondering, well, who were those 2 people? That leads to our second question this week.
Good.
Question number 2. Who were the 2 5-star recruits that Georgia signed in 2011? A, Keith Marshall and Malcolm Mitchell. B, Isaiah Crowell and Ray Drew. C, Alec Ogletree and Aaron Murray. Or D, John Theus and Todd Gurley.
So it's not Murray because he would have already been on the roster, so you can eliminate C. Gurley came in as a freshman in 2012, so it's not him. You can eliminate D. So that leaves you with Crowell or Drew, Marshall or Malcolm Mitchell. Marshall was a part of the Gurley class. So I'm going to go with Ray Drew and Isaiah Crowell as answer B as the correct answer.
Well done. I am proud and impressed that you were able to go through and systematically eliminate the incorrect answer.
So for those of you who see me do these answers every single week, you kind of get an idea of how I was as a test taker. I probably was the longest person taking the test, but I got my process to figure this one out.
Yep, Crowell and Ray Drew. Malcolm Mitchell also a part of that 2011 class, but just narrowly missed out on being a 5-star.
Mitchell was a very good player in high school. He and Jay Rome as teammates at Valdosta were a pretty good little tandem.
There's a story about Kirby Smart when he was down to Georgia and Alabama, and when he picked Georgia, Kirby Smart was very, very upset.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat to know. That's a good one to go back and remember how that all went together.
Question number 3. Georgia Landon Crowell started a run on 5-star running backs for the program, including 2011, meaning Crowell.
Yeah.
How many 5-star running backs has Georgia signed over that period?
All right, so famously it's not Gurley. You can't put Gurley on this list, but you can put Michelle. You can put Chubb. Did Swift finished as a 5-star? He was a very high-rated 4-star. Did he finish as a 5-star? I'm going to say he did. That gets me up to 3, so that's more than 2. It's not 9. I want to say it's 6, A6.
A6.
Matt Mayfield says it's B4. There gets to a point where I just get tired of doing the math on this kind of stuff, so I'm going to say it's A6.
A lot of B's coming in.
Yeah, a lot of B4s coming in. But Swift in 2017 did get upgraded in the final rankings, right?
The correct answer is 6.
All
yes,
right.
he was
All right.
a 5-star. We will go through and name the 5-stars. You had Crowell in 2011.
Yeah.
Marshall in 2012. Chubb and Michelle in 2014. DeAndre Swift in 2017.
Sure.
And Zamir White in 2018.
Yeah, for a long time, Swift kind of stood there as like the highest rated 4-star in the entire country. Like he was, of the individual rankings, he was the highest rated 4-star, and they finally gave him the bump up at the end, and he's played that way since he's been at Georgia.
Yeah, he certainly lived up to that 5-star status.
C.J. Davis has been perfect thus far. Good job, C.J.
You know, I mean, of the guys that have actually gotten a chance to play, Michelle, Chubb, and Swift, they have all sort of lived up to that. Marshall certainly looked the part his freshman year, and unfortunately, injuries, I think, robbed him of what should have been a very promising.
But and I think beyond that, I think we know that he was a pretty impressive running back target himself.
Yep. Question 4. Of those 6 running backs, who was the highest in terms of overall ranking?
This is a good question. I don't have any idea whatsoever. This is a very good question, though. I'm going to assume, and y'all can do this one with me, I'm going to assume this was Zamir White. I'm going to assume that Zamir was the highest rated of all, although admittedly I just don't have any idea. Matt Mayfield says he thinks it's Zamir White. Let's see if other people agree with me. Brian McPhail says White. Pine Sol Lemon Scent, good to hear from him. He says A, and really a whole bunch of folks on YouTube say A. So I feel pretty good about this. For some reason, I think Zamir White's probably the right answer here.
I think I've stumped just about everybody. The correct
Wow.
answer is not Zamir White.
Is
It's
that
in
right?
fact Isaiah Crowell.
Okay, so I had no idea.
Now, if you wanted to argue, there is an asterisk here. Crowell and White were just about neck and neck, and Crowell, by the slimmest of margins, finished ahead of them.
Yeah.
Georgia fans well remember Zamir White tore his ACL in November of his senior year. And what that sort of did was it didn't let him show out and go play in the All-American Bowl. If he played there and played as well as he had at literally every other point of his football playing life, he probably finishes above Crowell in the final
So
ranking.
here's the other thing, too, about Crowell. People remember how it ended for him at Georgia, but he goes on to play for the Cleveland Browns. He may still be in the
Still
NFL
is.
for all I know. He put up some big numbers in a Browns uniform,
Yep.
and so he's kind of proven himself to be, even if the Georgia career was not quite great, he's proven himself to be a legit running back.
He clearly has the. I think the recruitniks out there, they feel validated by what he's gone on and done.
That's a pretty
Even if-
interesting thing.
Even if he didn't live up to the hype.
Pretty interesting piece of information to become aware of.
Question 5.
All
Let's
right.
make BA real happy and
All
say
right.
Kendall Milton picks Georgia.
I like it already.
How many running backs would rank ahead of him in terms of all-time UGA commits?
So this is like the total, not the star rating, but the total score from
Yes.
24/7.
2, 3, 4, and 6.
I don't know, but I'm assuming it's a decent amount because he's not the highest rated running back in the country right now. So I'm going to say it's C4. I'm going to say C4.
C4.
Actually, I'm going to say B3. I'm going to change it to 3. I'm going to say it's B3.
You had it.
Did I really?
You
Never
had
change your answer.
had
All
it.
you kids say in the
Go
SAT, don't change your answer. Go with your first.
Go with your gut. It was Isaiah Crowell, Zamir White, Keith Marshall,
Okay.
Sony Michelle.
Okay.
Sony Michelle just barely ranked ahead of Milton right now. I think there's a chance Milton ends up surpassing Michelle once the final rankings end up being tabulated.
And by the way, Michelle did some great stuff down there in
Yes.
Plantation, Florida for American Heritage for sure. So should have stuck with my first answer on that one, but I kind of got that one wrong.
Last question.
All right, here we go.
Who is the highest rated high school running back in the modern recruiting era?
All right, so all backs in the modern era,
Yep.
going back to kind of early stages of the internet in 1999, you got Leonard Fournette, you got Zachary Evans, you got Adrian Peterson, you got Joe McKnight, who was also at Oklahoma. I'm going to assume this one is still Adrian Peterson. Maybe Zachary Evans is the number one player in the country right now, though, isn't he? Or at least he was. I guess Jordan Birch is number one now. Ooh. Is Evans the highest rated recruit since 1999 of the backs? I feel like you wouldn't be asking if it wasn't true. So I'm tempted to say Adrian Peterson, who I would have thought of before this. Philip Jordan Wells says D. Joe McKnight. Nathan Edwards says Evans. I kind of want to get this one right. John T. Went says Leonard Fournette. I feel like this is Evans or Peterson. Evans was the number 1 player in the country. I'm going to go Zachary Evans.
Wow. You didn't even see the clear sign there. Evans, huge name. Fournette, huge name.
Joe McKnight's the outlier. Should have named him.
Joe McKnight, kind of the outlier.
All right.
Just barely edged out Peterson and Fournette. McKnight, number 13 overall, all time.
So that's
Peterson
a bad job.
And Fournette tied for 15.
That's a
Credit
bad.
to Philip Jordan Wells for sniffing.
Yeah, good job. So you're right. McKnight was not the kind of guy we would typically ask about. Yeah, that's not.
Now, grade my performance compared to Sentell's. How did I do?
I love those questions. I'm not going to disparage Mr. Sentell,
No.
but I did love those questions for sure. Connor Riley, and a lot of folks have gotten some enjoyment out of seeing Connor kind of in front of the lights here today, not trapped behind the glass of our Dog Nation World Headquarters studios. And here's actually some pretty big news when it comes to Connor. He's making kind of his in-studio debut for us. He's also going to be on the Feinbaum Show as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to let Connor hop off the set here and go get ready for that. I'm going to take a lot of your comments as a part of our hurry up here in a moment. So y'all say goodbye to Connor. You can give Connor
Thank you guys. A real joy.
a little bit of a screen to get his way out of here. I'm going to get ready to take a lot of your comments as well. We'll put 5 minutes on the clock here. The truth is I may end up going longer than 5 minutes or whatever. We'll just take a few comments and let Connor get ready for his TV spot and kind of figure out how things go. Brian McPhail says all-around running back questions. Yeah, listen, sometimes we like to do a little bit of a theme here, and we got a chance to do that right there. Elite Georgia Boy says, good job, Connor. No doubt about that. Upper Deck Dog says, good luck to Connor there as well. So that's all really good stuff, too. So we're all in pretty good shape on all of this. The Shadow Assassin says, comparing guys to Isaiah Crowell. Yeah, so we'll keep taking these comments. The Shadow Assassin also asking about how that offensive line, or I should say that new offensive coordinator for Georgia is going to do. And I think one of the things you're going to see from James Coley is that need to get more of these Georgia offensive weapons involved, whether it be a tight end like Charlie Warner, who we discussed during the show, or whether it be some of these creative sort of multi-option guys like James Cook. You got to find a way to get more of those guys involved in the Georgia offense here this season. Over here on Facebook here for a moment. Tim Hope says, did you say anything about the crystal ball for Zachary Evans? Obviously, any kind of online chatter that connects Evans and Georgia right now is really good news. And, I did take it as good news when Evans listed Georgia as one of his finalists last week. I think the thing, though, that I can't quite get over with yet is the absence of Texas or Texas A&M on that list of finalists, the presence of a program like Ohio State that we had a guest on Dog Nation Daily recently that said he didn't think there was any relationship whatsoever between Georgia and Ohio State, and likelihood you could, or should say Evans and Ohio State, likely you could eliminate that from consideration. Ultimately, though, while I feel good about Georgia's placement among Evans finalists right now, I still wonder before this is all said and done if one of those Texas schools, the Aggies and the Longhorns, don't get more involved in this at some point in time. So that's kind of the thing that I'm left with there. I love online chatter connecting Evans and Georgia, but I'm still not quite sold these two schools in the Lone Star State are completely out of this yet. I think it's a really good question. John T. Went says, if Rahm comes to Georgia, does he also play baseball? I think it's a really good question. I don't have any idea about that, but that'd be a very interesting thing to look in and see. And by the way, there's been a lot of baseball news over the last couple of days here with a lot of these guys getting drafted and thinking about their future. And in at least one case, when it comes to Cam Shepard, the decision to stay back and be a part of the Georgia program moving forward. On YouTube, on Facebook, some more. Let's get a few more of these comments here. We'll see what else everybody's saying. A lot of folks giving some well wishes to Connor Riley for being on the program here today. What else we got here going on the Facebook comment section right now? Let's see what else we got going on here on Facebook right now. Adrian Carver says this six-pack just illustrates what UGA has done in recruiting and developing talent. Why in the world would Milton consider going anywhere else, especially Ohio State? And I think that that's a good point from Adrian here, that when you look at the overall level of success that Georgia's had recruiting the running back position, there is no doubt that level of running back success for Georgia is also what it's using to sell guys like Kendall Milton and presumably Zachary Evans as well. It's one of the reasons why some Georgia fans even wonder about the possibility of bringing in both Milton and Evans as a part of this class, because Georgia has a history of doing just that. When it signed Sony Michel, it also signed Nick Chubb. When it signed Todd Gurley, it also signed Keith Marshall, who actually was the higher rated player at the time. That Georgia has not only recruited and signed elite running backs, it's done so in tandems here multiple times, and that's obviously what Georgia has going forward. A lot of these brands, in terms of who's DBU or RBU or linebacker university, whatever, a lot of this kind of stuff ends up kind of just being sort of vapid puffery, frankly. But in certain cases, you can look and say, we have a current, modern track record of success. Look what this offensive line has done for these running backs, and that's really what Kendall Milton sees himself with. Obviously, the heritage of a guy like Herschel Walker really matters, and all the other first-round picks that came after Herschel, they really matter as well. But what helps Georgia more than anything else is this coach, these offensive coaches, for the most part, minus Jim Chaney, these offensive linemen, they've done great things for running backs before, and that's what I think really helps with Milton, I think for sure. Charles Kaiser asked a really good question. He says, over or under 10 touchdowns for Pickens? Boy, in the Kirby Smart era, 10 touchdowns for an individual receiver would be a very, very high total. In fact, I don't believe anyone's gotten the 10 total since Kirby Smart's been here. I think the high water mark is Javon Williams with 7 in 2017, right? So just based on that, you probably go under the 10 when it comes to Pickens. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that he can make a very significant contribution for Georgia. In fact, I think between he and Lawrence Cager, the graduate transfer from Miami, and Dominic Blaylock, we've talked a lot about, I think a couple of those guys could be pretty significant for Georgia here this season. James Crump says, will Jamari Salyer start this season? No disrespect to Salyer. Ultimately, though, I think the 5 starters for Georgia are going to be whom we assume they would be at the start of spring practice. I do think Trey Hill is your center. I think that your 2 tackle spots are solidified with Andrew Thomas and Isaiah Wilson. And I think between Solomon Kinley and Ben Cleveland, you've got your 2 guards. I think that Salyer and Cade Mays become 2 very impressive 5-star level backups. But as it stands right now, despite the fact that Salyer got some first-team reps during spring practice, I think your starters are still pretty well set on that. John T. Wentz says Theo Johnson may be trending towards Michigan. Is distance a factor there? Ultimately, I think the big factor there is, while a lot of college teams can be said don't use the tight end as effectively as NFL teams do, one of the teams that's not that way is probably Michigan. Michigan's had great success using the tight end, so if a guy like Theo Johnson's interested in Michigan, one of the feathers they would have in their cap is they can say, like a lot of these Big Ten teams have, that we've used tight ends effectively, maybe even more so effectively than Georgia. That's one of the things I think that Todd Hartley is going to try to influence Georgia to change this season, being more involved with tight ends in the offense to impress a guy like a Rick Gilbert, maybe future generations of guys like Theo Johnson and beyond, because Georgia has not been as good at making those guys a part of the offense. This year that could change, but for Michigan, to its credit, they can sell tight end usage because they've been using them there for a while. Seth Farmer says, prediction on a record this year. And Seth, we'll make this our last comment as part of our show here today, and we'll make you the winner of our $50 Kroger How About Them Groceries gift card. We appreciate you weighing in on the program here today. So I know that because I wear the red and black clothes, and because unlike the recruiting insider Jeff Sentell or the serious reporters, I kind of wear more of the label, I guess, as the fan around here. I don't mind that. I am a fan of the Georgia Bulldogs. Because of that, I always have to be careful with when I say something positive about Georgia that some people may assume that it's just being said because I am a fan. It's what, as a fan, I want to say, and it's as a fan what I think other fans want to hear. But in the case with Georgia with its record this year, I think there's a lot of strong evidence to suggest that Georgia has a very good chance to go 12-0 in the regular season. Now, once you get to, let's say, Alabama in the SEC championship or beyond that in the college football playoff, those games are essentially fair fights, almost 50-50 coin flips, slight favorite, both Clemson and Alabama likely when the games are played on a neutral site. So let's hold off on saying what happens in the SEC championship. Let's hold off on what happens in a college football playoff beyond that. When you look at these 12 regular season games, you're going to see Georgia be a favorite in all 12. And in some cases, we already see evidence against Notre Dame, for instance, on the road at Tennessee, on the road at Auburn, to close out the season against Georgia Tech. You see Georgia's already a significant favorite, really double digits almost in every one of those instances. About a touchdown or so against Auburn, a little less than 10 points maybe against Notre Dame, but still a pretty strong favorite in all those games. The one game right now where Georgia's favored the least, ironically based on the Golden Nugget and CG Technology and Bet Online and some of these sports books who release some odds, the game in which Georgia's favored the least is the Florida game. And I've made my case on Dog Nation Daily for a while now that I don't see what some of the national media sees with Florida. Of the games that Georgia plays this season, I don't expect Florida to be the toughest. I think the road trip at Auburn is probably the toughest of all, and I think that maybe one of these so-called trap games ends up maybe being more competitive than some fans want it to be. But I think that Georgia's going to be emotionally ready for that cocktail party game in Jacksonville, and I think that Vegas and a lot of the media are just dead flat wrong when it comes to their evaluation of the Gators. So from an empirical standpoint, there's a pretty strong case to be made for Georgia winning all 12 of its regular season games, and probably, I believe, a stronger case for winning all 12 than has existed at any point in time in the program's history since the last time it went undefeated all the way back in 1980. We'll obviously have to see how that plays out, but no doubt it should be a lot of fun to watch. And Seth, we appreciate your question. We'll be getting in touch with you about how you can pick up your $50 Kroger How About Them Groceries gift card. And we really appreciate all of you for being a part of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger here this week. Jeff Sentell will be back next week. He'll give you a lot of his recruiting information. You want more details on Zachary Evans and kind of all that stuff. Jeff will be here and ready to provide all of that for you, and I can't wait to be a part of that as well. I'll be with you live tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for Dog Nation Daily. We're getting ready for Dog Nation Days of Summer and everything else. And as you're getting ready for your own summer plans, make sure you check out our friends at Kroger for the cookouts or the parties or the road trips, anything else. You can get all stocked up and ready to go at your local Atlanta Kroger. We'll help you check that out. Huge thanks to Connor Riley, Michael Carvell, our whole staff for making this show possible here today. And a biggest thanks of all for all of you for being with us for it. We'll see you next week at 3 p.m. for Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, and tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for Dog Nation Daily. Y'all have a great day, everybody.